My name is Liam Edwards, and welcome to my Global and Community Impact presentation. On this slide are the discussion points I am going to talk about during my presentation, from my initial research question all the way to my big biography. In my presentation, I will be exploring natural disaster coverage from a Western country and a non-Western country, as how it differs across multiple mainstream outlets. So why is this question important? Aluson and Bergles in 2014 say climate journalism is important because it links to other spheres than the scientific aspects, such as politics, culture, and lifestyle. However, Joy's 2020 analysis shows that many natural disasters get neglected, especially in non-Western countries. Consequences could be drastic because, like Joy 2018 says, the lack of news coverage will impact the support countries receive, so combining force of people together can create political change. Some countries are left without support, so it's important to raise these viewpoints to society. I wanted to explore the difference in how media's coverage differs when reporting on different disasters. Azad 2020 says there is an initial bias towards Western disasters, which could be due to the publication's target audience. This shaped my initial thoughts before going into my research. Also, some global disasters are understood from directly affected people, Frank says in 2008, due to not having a voice through the media to reveal their experiences. Like Joy 2009 says, coverage of disasters are influenced by the power and division that characterize our contemporary world. This links to how conflict impacts their media publicity. Relating to my research question, I had to pick one Western and one non-Western natural disaster to analyse, and decided to explore the coverage of the Australian bushfires in 2020 as my Western disaster. Like Wilson says in 2021, the bushfire season between June 2019 and May 2020 led to unprecedented wildlife devastation, and this led to 479 deaths. Many people have said this to be the worst wildfire season the country has ever encountered. We also analysed the Afghanistan floods that occurred in May till August in 2022, because the country is prone for recurring natural disasters, and I want to see how a publication explored these flash floods like Atifi and Muria in 2022 as described. This disaster killed 670 people, which is more than the Australian bushfires over a shorter period of time. Additionally, the Taliban was in power during this disaster, and I want to explore whether a country with a dictatorship has an impact on their news coverage. I decided to focus on mainstream international websites that publish about issues across the world. I chose The Guardian, The Independent, Fox News, CNN, and Al Jazeera to look for stories about these disasters. This is because these publications produce global coverage but are Western-based news organisations, so I want to see how this impacts on the news they prioritise. Also, all of these news websites have a huge viewership as seen on this slide, proving their power within this sector. For my research, I decided to do both content and textual analysis to see if there are any emerging patterns. Bellerson, 1952, says content analysis is compressing text into categories based on rules of coding, and I've done this in my own work by using the codes of focus of the story and the angle the story took when reporting on these disasters. I then completed some textual analysis on a smaller field of stories. Smith, 2017, says textual analysis is examining messages as they appear through different mediums, and I have done this by looking at the type of language being used for each disaster, as well as the variety in voices. One code I used for my content analysis was the different framing techniques, and for my secondary research, I used Azad's 2020 strategy on how to split stories into different categories based on angles taken. These five categories are the human interest frame, disaster management frame, humanitarian frame, political frame, and climate change frame. Frame analysis allows the audience to see how the narrative constructs meanings of events, Jangelo 2010. So these angles are the only way people get educated about global disasters. For my first sample, I conducted content analysis on the amount of articles published on these disasters, as well as the framings news outlets use. Firstly, to find these stories, I used the search bar on these news websites and I picked stories at random for my analysis. In total, I looked at 50 articles, 30 about the Australian bushfires and 20 about the Afghanistan floods, and I coded them by whether the disaster is the main focus of the story or if it's just mentioned. From the main focus articles, I coded 5 different frames that I mentioned on the previous slide to compare story angles when it comes to different natural disasters. I discovered the coverage of the two disasters varied. For the Australian disaster stories, they all had a main focus on the country and the issues of the disaster. However, there were more of a divide for the Afghanistan stories, where I found it difficult to find stories focusing on the country. Like McCobb's 2011 says, what we know about the world is through the mainstream stories produced on, and with their focus here, it reveals that their priority is on westernised countries' issues. Also, I found an interesting pattern that emerged with the Afghanistan floods coverage. These articles from The Independent, The Guardian, and CNN all include mentions of Afghanistan's neighbouring country, Pakistan, revealing a brief explanation about the impact on their country. When the story looks like it focuses on them through the headline, other countries still get mentioned. This supports Bettini's 2018 theory that countries like Afghanistan are othered. Also, this shows the lack of news getting out of Afghanistan, so publications result in mentioning neighbouring countries where news could be more open and free to release. Another finding I discovered was alternate framing by using as a structure I mentioned earlier. Daniel, 2002, says international media often provide a distorted picture of a third world country by emphasizing the negative aspects. From all five international publications, the non-Western stories mainly use the disaster management frame, but link to the amount of deaths occurred. This links to the distorted picture Daniel mentioned. On the other hand, for the Australian bushfire stories, we have a variety of frames, which show the different impacts of the disaster. For example, if we look at these headlines on the Australian bushfires, the focus isn't just on the impact on the people. It shows how it impacted wildlife, with 5,000 koalas being killed, as well as how the rest of the world, like the USA, supported the country with the crisis. And this will make the country relatable for the audience, with Fox News being based in America. For the Afghanistan stories, publications focus on the death aspect, revealing exact figures from secondary sources. Other frames were mainly unused in their coverage. They don't even use the humanitarian frame, which could link to their lack of support and the public's worry to share their views because of the potential consequences by the Taliban. Joyce, 2009, says Western news media consider the lives of the third world to be less valuable, and this is proven by the lack of frames used. After my content analysis, I conducted some textual analysis, looking in more depth about the type of language publications use for different disasters, as well as the different types of voices you hear within these articles. For this, I picked out two articles from each publication, one about the Australian bushfires and one about the Afghanistan floods, to see the similarities and differences between how publications report these disasters. These are the five stories I looked at about the Australian bushfires. Five stories I looked at about the Afghanistan floods. My first finding was political stance. All the mainstream outlets I have chosen are from Western countries, apart from Al Jazeera, which is English based. With this being said, the focus on these countries mainly due to the majority of their audience being from these areas. This is shown through the type of language used in the Australian bushfire stories compared to the Afghanistan floods, due to the country's political relationship with the Taliban being negative. This supports Attad's 2019 theory that political issues influence disaster news coverage from these major publications. The Australian bushfire stories use a motive language throughout. For the CNN story about the firefighter's young daughter at his funeral, they say innocent words like she toddled and describing her as a baby, which will make people feel sympathy for her. Fox News also used emotive language to describe the bushfires, like how the disaster was escalating, which showed people's constant suffering. In the Al Jazeera article, the line of "bushfires are an accepted part of life" reveals how this issue reoccurs in the country, and how people haven't got a choice but to accept it. The construction of the Afghanistan articles are different. Firstly, these articles are based on statistics, like the article from Al Jazeera has added 5 lines of information about the disaster. Also, the independent story is quite brief when talking about the disaster, while also using aggressive words like damaged and destroyed. These articles have a lot of case studies like from Associated Press instead of original news sources. This could link to the toughness to get information out of the country, which supports Jared's 2013 statement that Afghanistan represents a unique case of media development. Another finding was about representation. Both articles used different amount of voices to reveal the impact of the disaster. A brief overview of my findings here is that news organisations prioritise Western news due to stereotypes that may evolve around non-Western countries. Like it says in the second screenshot, the country has been out of the spotlight since the US forces left, so this links when Westernized countries are not involved, news outlets still prioritise non-Western disasters. The Australian bushfire stories have a variety of voices like people in Australia or experts who have knowledge about the impact of the disaster. Like The Guardian spoke to a resident in the country so the audience can feel some real life connection with someone. Also, Al Jazeera interviewed a specialist from a university in Australia about the different type of impact the fires have on the country. The audience will know they are getting accurate information from someone heavily examining the issue. Both of these people are primary sources, which makes the audience be able to find out a new viewpoint. Afghanistan floods coverage, they use public statements to shape their story narrative. When looking at the Fox News coverage, they used a quote from the Pakistan Prime Minister, which shows them just gathering secondary quotes to progress their story. Also, The Independent and CNN follow this trend by using secondary quotes from figureheads. This links to the difficulty of communicating with someone in a non-Western country. Also, these publications only use political voices in their articles and no one from the public, so the audience isn't getting that real-life interaction. Overall, I found that Westernized stories offer a variety of angles with their disaster coverage compared to a non-Western disaster. Also, the balance of stories are different, where Western news focuses on people close to the story compared to non-Western news that uses more secondary sources. The detail in these two stories are vastly different, which shows the publication's priorities. Like Mitney, 2005, says, there should be a unified space, and this is what I wanted to include within my writing, allowing people from non-Western countries a platform to reveal their multiple struggles. Also, climate change wasn't mentioned as much as I expected, so I wanted to focus on this angle and how it could affect countries in the future. My first article was about how Afghanistan is affected by global disasters, and it was written as a news feature of 821 words. I wanted to reveal someone's story who have encountered these issues, which mainstream publications were straying away from. I interviewed former spokesperson for the Afghanistan government, Qadriya Matifi, who was in Afghanistan during these disasters and had knowledge on the many impacts it had on the country. I also added background context to describe the ongoing conflict in the country and its impact on their disasters. I have added statistics to reveal the disasters they have encountered before as well. I have included different parts of the interview with Kadir, revealing different elements such as the impacts, educating people, and how the Taliban have taken people's freedom away. Humanitarian, climate change, and political angles are used here which mainstream publications didn't include. A touch embed was added to reveal the major impact disaster have had on the country before. I had hyperlinked text at the end that shows charities supporting people in Afghanistan. This is an example of public sphere where people have done work around the world to support the country. The second story focuses on the importance of climate change in the UK, and it was written as a news feature of 670 words. I wanted to raise awareness about climate change, starting with the UK. I interviewed Claudia Carter, who is an environmental lecturer at Birmingham City University, so she knows the importance of the issue. I kept in mind the UK audience and included data that links to the government's environmental plans. We also included images of climate change protesters and nature itself, so the audience could put a picture to what the article is about. Again, I have covered multiple angles in this story such as political, climate change and humanitarian, which will keep the audience engaged. Changing people's ways about climate change is my main aim due to the lack of focus in mainstream publications. Adding a social media embed of a UK protest reveals what other people are willing to go through to create change. At the end of the article, I finish with a small quote to leave the audience thinking about the significance of climate change and how they can change their ways for the better. Publication. I reached out to HuffPost and Birmingham Inside because all of them have liberal viewpoints and most likely publish my articles. However, I was only able to publish on my personal blog, Eat, Sleep, Publish. These reasons was after multiple emails, editors of the publications didn't get back to me with a response in time. However, I did receive an email from lecturer Paul Bradshaw revealing positive and negative aspects of my climate change article. He said gave me tips on how to make a more professional piece of work about the disasters in the future. From this study, I gained a better understanding of how mainstream platforms differ between coverage on Western countries and non-Western countries' events, and how journalism framing can play a role on shaping audience opinions. My analysis supports a global media bias towards Western disasters due to the attention devoted to the Australian bushfires compared to the Afghanistan floods. However, I conducted this research for the first time and by myself, so next time a bigger sample size of days, an option of more media outlets will possibly improve accuracy on the studied topic. Here is my appendices based on how I constructed my two articles from my assignment portfolio. Here is my bibliography with all my references I used within my presentation. All of these references are in the Harvard referencing style and they are all in alphabetical order. This is part 2 of my bibliography.